Hi, welcome back to my channel. Given the end of life of Windows 10 and some of the issues about Windows 11 not supporting certain hardware, a lot of people are asking this question: is Windows doomed? My video is a take on this. To start off with my answer, no, not even close. And interestingly, that's probably a good thing for Linux. A lot of people are posing this as like going to be a watershed moment for Linux, and I don't think it's going to be that moment. And not only that, but it's going to be a good thing overall. And I'll go into this into a minute. But to start out with, as it comes to Windows 11, now I don't think Windows 11 is really that much worse than Windows 10. It's overblown in a lot of respects, but I understand why there's certain of hills that people are really stuck on. Like the local account thing doesn't really matter that much. If you look at what a Microsoft account really is, it's really much more. It's just basically saving some settings in the cloud that makes it easier for you things like, oh, like what you do with phones. Oh, I want to be able to back up certain stuff, and I want to be able to have certain keys and certain types of stuff so I can set up a new PC. That's pretty much what it's for. Is it good enough to really drive people to want to use that? No, but it is not this all we're going to eat all your data type of play that people think it is. And a lot of those people are the ones that turn around and will have everything in the Google Drive and not realizing that Google by default does more with that data than Microsoft does. Now, here's the thing: does Microsoft want to get in that space? Yes. We'll talk about why in a minute. And so, yeah, that is an issue. And that's why I think people deserve to be more skeptical. And certainly, if they weren't also trying to put all these AI features and really dumbing down certain types of things, and in some cases making the experience, yeah, kind of suck, then people would be a lot less unhappy about, basically would be a lot more willing to do things like a Microsoft account. And here's the thing: if Microsoft takes a hit on their market share, that's great. The bigger it is, the better. I don't think it will be anything fatal by a stretch of the imagination, but the more it gets their attention, the better off they are. And again, as this closer, Windows is my main OS. I have a video about why I use Windows as a developer. Um, and so I'm still going to use it as my daily driver. And so that's my bias here. But I do not want to seem as a Windows apologist because, yeah, Microsoft is making my life harder too in some respects. So switching to Linux, I'm not going to be interested in switching to Linux. I just want to point out that it's not because I don't understand it, all right? And it's not because I think it's really bad. I put up with setup issues in Linux that no one would deal with right now because I used Linux before I ever started using Windows. My first PCs had Linux on them. It was a Slackware distribution and then my first version of Red Hat on a CD. So I had to do things like, save up for a Mach 32 card because that was the only accelerated card that would work with Windows. I had to do dot clock files for my monitor so that my monitor worked correctly. You know, all these kind of things that I don't think anybody knows how to do now, and would definitely never do. Would never even want to think about. No one would ever accept Linux if they had to write a dot clock file because they plugged in a monitor. That just doesn't happen. And of course, it's not necessary because Linux is a lot better without that stuff. So I understand it, and I did it back when it was way tougher than it is now. For me personally, it's just that Windows is still the best choice for what I do. So this AI enhancement stuff. Now, here's the thing. I do think this accession of AI might drive people to the Linux platform. Where I think it'll come more from is from the Mac OS side. And the reason being is that the Mac OS people have kind of delayed it, but they really are pushing the integrated Apple Intelligence stuff just as much as Microsoft is pushing Copilot. And the thing about the Mac OS users that came over from like the Linux side because they wanted a Unix environment, but with just a better overall environment to interact with it, they might be willing to move back. And there was a reason they moved over to Mac OS, and there's a reason I also kind of stayed on Windows. And it's kind of an odd one, and it's still there, but not nearly as much. Is that it looks better just in terms of text. It's gotten much better lately, right? But for a long time, the font quality, the display quality, it was just not good compared to Windows and definitely compared to Mac OS. You had things like you go to Mac OS, you look at the typography, you could look at things and read things on a screen, and it didn't fatigue your eyes. And Linux for a long time, things just looked kind of ugly. And so I certainly was one of those people that was just relieved because I remember when ClearType really came out at Windows 2000, that helped a lot for me to actually make it so I could use the computer better. I was one of those few people that really, really benefited from basically subpixel type aliasing and making that better on my eyes overall. So I do think that's going to drive some users to the Linux platform, but not necessarily on the Microsoft side. So on the Microsoft side, you have the Windows 10 EOL and the obsoleting of some hardware that won't run Windows 11 because of certain security features. This is arbitrary in pros. It's not completely arbitrary, but it's more arbitrary than I think people would put out. But at the same time, Microsoft has to draw the line in the sand somewhere, because this is the kind of thing you need. You do have to have a trusted platform module on this stuff at some point. You do need to have these types of things. There's certain types of things. Not only that, but the instruction set thing is real. There's a lot of optimizations that they can't do, because they can't guarantee that that's there on their OS. It is an issue. You wouldn't notice it because of all the other crap that they're putting on there, but it really does need to move forward. And if people want to use that, make that hardware and use it and keep it on Linux and want to keep it going, that's awesome. I just don't think it's going to be enough of a driver to really make a huge spike and change and difference in usage, because a lot of people, frankly, they're just going to just accept the risk with using Windows 10 until they have to jump to new hardware when it finally breaks. And Microsoft's going to stop bothering them about Windows upgrades after they realize that this liability window is finally closed, where it's like, we've been telling you for 2 years to do this. If you still refuse not to do what we told you to do and use a system that could be at risk, we're not going to accept any liability for the system being compromised anymore. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. But why is this all good for Linux? Why would it not be good for Linux to have a big uptick in usage? And the reason being is that it's going to overwhelm the support network needed for getting users on the platform. There's already so much goodwill out there getting these old PCs recycled, reused, and getting new people back on that platform that want to do this, that can't really afford it, right? That to have a bunch of other people coming in that could just actually buy a new PC and all that kind of stuff, and just want some support, and feel like they're entitled to a certain amount of support because they're used to being in that environment where it's like, well, I bought a Windows of HP and I bought this from Windows, so I expect to be able to have this level of support. That will overwhelm these networks, and it will completely destroy the amount of goodwill that's been built up in the community over this years. Because there'll be people that are really engaged in it and want to try to do this, but the amount of demands that would put on them will be so much that they will burn out, right? And right now, there's no money to build up professional support for doing this. There's not enough money in Linux as it sits today for people to, provide the kind of support that would needed to really build up this kind of increased adoption from less tech savvy users. Again, are there power users going to be on it? Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are going to push over it. The thing about it is that what a lot of people won't realize online is because, especially because they have confirmation biases, because, it's like, oh, I use this operating system, everybody's doing it, is no one's going off on the YouTube and saying, well, actually, I'm still using Windows 11. So, it works fine for me, right? It's boring. Who says that? And so the only people you're going to hear from is like, yes, oh no, by the way, I'm totally using Linux. I'm getting rid of it, so they can get, the social credit that they get for it. Or they really are really pissed off about how Windows things are doing things. But that's going to be a small percentage of users. And the thing about it is that when I talk to people that are like the power users, they don't really get as many things where how big the scale Microsoft plays on. And it's really interesting to me. It's one of those things where they don't realize that basically there's so many people that use it. And there's one of those things where when they were falling short of 1 billion users, people are kind of looking at that. They didn't realize that that was actually a problem for Microsoft. For some of them, that was a real crisis, that they had not done enough to drive adoption. 1 billion users, 1 billion devices, right? That's a lot. That's a significant amount of the population. And so, boy, when you're dealing with that kind of thing, there's a lot of compromises that you don't want to make. And Linux doesn't want to go there. Because if there was ever enough of a bump that Windows would be vulnerable for people to try to pour money into it, that level of investment would destroy everything that people actually like about the Linux platform. There will be there's nobody going to come in and say, we're going to invest so much to have all these distributions. No, they're going to be Linux trademark. They're going to be the next version of Microsoft. That's the whole point behind this. There's no goodwill here when you bring in that much money, right? The goal will be to displace this market share and to take it over. And that is not going to put you in any better place than what you have with Apple and Microsoft right now. because all the choices that you have as a Linux user, all the value that is of the platform, will be undermined by that investment, right? Now, certainly there'll be certain things about the GPL that stop it, but there's practicalities here. Whether someone comes into a space with a lot of money, you can control a lot of things. And that would happen with the desktop thing. Again, I don't see it happening for various reasons. Not only that, but basically because so much money is tied up in AI that, to get somebody to say, oh, actually, you should try to, knock down Microsoft, which has more cash than you could possibly imagine on hand potentially. It's never going to happen. And that's a good thing because it allows Linux to evolve in a way that is community oriented and respects people choosing how they want to use their computers. No free lunch here. The reason Windows and Windows 11 is dealing with all this kind of stuff is that there's still a demand in terms of shareholders and economics for them to get some amount of revenue out of all the Windows users and not just completely subsidize it by enterprise usage. And the way they're doing that is not optimal. They should be doing it in different ways, but that's why it's happening. That's why there's kind of a push towards Microsoft accounts. There's a push for upselling, Office 365 subscription and all of this, right? Because they don't have what Apple has, which is basically they can't really sell hardware at the same margins that Apple does, and they just don't have the community free will, obviously, that Linux has. The amount of open source goodwill that Microsoft has now is notable already compared to how big of a company they are. To push that off into the Windows world would be patently ridiculous, kind of insulting too. Oh, by the way, we're a very big corporation, but we sure love some individual contributions to the operating system that makes us billions of dollars of revenue every quarter. That's just madness. But, so the marketing people can say, like, well, how can you make money? And the Windows people, unfortunately, are on the stick for having to do that. And some of the decisions they make is pretty dumb. The thing about this, too, is that fixing this is not that difficult. This is not Microsoft, Windows 11 is not fatally flawed. They're bolting in all this cold stuff, but it's not basically, it is bolted in. You can take the bolts off. They don't do that. They're trying to sneak it in as core features and all this kind of stuff. But in the reality, it's basically, there's nothing that they could do with just a set of, install this stuff from Microsoft Store, right? So they could move all this AI functionality to the store, make it completely opt-in, don't have anything built into the operating system. They could do that with recall, all this stuff, if they wanted to. And, that would, they could let it play out that way. So reducing that suck there is fine. It would be a little bit more difficult, but undoing the damage they've done to OneDrive and how it integrates with the Windows operating system, that could happen. Basically, kind of, you just have to come up with a better version of it. But, it kind of make it, and not only that, but make it work more like it used to than it does now. And then things like fixing backup in terms of file history and image restore, that's a really no-brainer. And boy, that would bring so much free will if they actually got system imaging backup working again. I mean, that would just be, it's ridiculous that we're still having to use the Windows 7 version, being told your Windows images could blow up at the very second and use something else, versus come up with a better solution then. People are going to need to image their drives to do backup. We don't want to just install a new version of Windows and then spend God knows how long reinstalling all this stuff. Because some of this, for example, in the Windows world, I have to go through with all my audio plugins. It just takes me forever if I wanted to do a version of my operating system. And that's going to always be the case. They're not going to put all their stuff on the store. They're not going to make it available in Winget. They're going to make me install the thing that says, oh, check your subscriptions, all this kind of stuff. It'll take me forever to install all this junk. I want to be able to just image my freaking operating system so that when I upgrade my CPU, I don't panic. You can crank back telemetry out of the gate and be more transparent how it works. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about telemetry. I think it's something that average users don't really care about as much, unfortunately. And the reason is, though, to be perfectly honest, most users do not mind applications gathering data to make the OS and those applications suck less. If that's what it's really about, is if it comes back and saying, oh, there's some crashes and those crashes get fixed because telemetry was doing their job, no one's going to complain about that. And it's something that Linux has the kind of a catch-22 about, is that There's a lot of, unfortunately, in the worst case, outright gaslighting on some people. Oh no, you can't have a problem installing Linux. Of course you can have a problem installing Linux. You can have a problem installing Windows, right? PCs are weird, really weird environments that can do really strange things. And the thing about it is that Linux doesn't have telemetry built into its setup processes because that's kind of not their thing, right? That turn a lot of users off. So what that means though is that a lot of people don't have the thing to say. It's like, but here's how it worked, and no one's actually seeing those problems and how to fix them because it's impossible to then bring up by saying it's like, as you tried to do this, and when I did it, it just didn't work. They don't have the kind of environment to figure out where those problems going on. So again, that choice, that freedom from having that kind of more intrusive telemetry for some people is what makes Linux good. And so it's a good thing for them. But it does mean that a lot of users will be alienated by their experience because they'll feel like that they're not being taken seriously. Finally, what Microsoft can do, and this is just as simple, as easy as possibly can be, just put the Pro back on the Pro version. Just make a power user version again and make it slightly different. It's one of those things where don't make it Pro something like, well, you can join a domain. Make it so it's much more minimal out of the box. Disable the telemetry, allow potential insecure configuration, making sure that you can bring everything you need into the store by features, but make sure that's done in a mindful type of way, right? And people get a little more customization. I want to really I want this to be a game box. Then I'm going to bring in the game stuff. I don't want to do allow people to really bring in more of the stuff. And again, more in the spirit of what the enterprise IoT versions are, except a little bit more that comes on the image so that you have more drivers by default and things like that. And yeah, just sell people for that and basically say it's like, hey, here's what we're not going to do and not gather. And people will buy that. People will buy that for, you could sell that. You can make 100 a year off that easy. Or if you're really want to do a lot of goodwill, make it $150 for every 3 years. And have to buy extra support after that if they don't want to go to a Nerve version or buy it. Have them do that instead. So just start selling the operating system that's a real proper professional version of it, and there will be people that will buy it, and that you can make that profitable. And also better hardware. Google has Pixel. You need to keep Surface around for the same reason. Keep pushing on making sure that they have really excellent laptops that just come with a bog standard out of the box Windows experience. And not only that, but I would push back on the OEMs to basically say it's like, look, we'll work with you, but any PC that you sell a Pro version on, it's stock Windows. You don't put any more OEM stuff on it, that image. We'll make sure that those OEM vendor tools are in the store, that you can have them. Make sure that they're available for WinGet. We'll make sure that they can be done and installed fairly easily, but you're not sticking in the image by default because it doesn't need to be there. And yeah, and so really stop your third-party vendors for doing what, they do already, which is trying to make extra bucks out of it, but just putting just crap on the machine, installing it by default. Unfortunately, with the home version, I think you have to kind of allow some of that because there are already thin margins on the hardware to begin with, and the OEMs need to come try to make it somewhere. And so it'd be probably impossible for them to do on the home version. But if someone's buying a Pro license of Windows 11, yeah, no, it should just be the Pro version, not have anything from the OEM on it. So in summary, yeah, I hope Windows does see a notable hit on their usage because of this, and encourages them to stop sucking as much. But the thing about it is that it's not going to be this catastrophic thing for Microsoft because the suck's fairly easy to stop. This was one of those things where this is not a fatal blow to how Microsoft needs to do things. It's just they need to just not be so obviously bad at certain things, and it'll be a much better OS. And so that's all they need to do. And so it's going to be one of those things for Microsoft to respond to threats to their market share. Be fairly easy to do. And ultimately, that's why I think it will not lead to this major disruption that would actually be detrimental to Linux as a whole, when you think about it. Anyway, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.